My name is Lorraine Barrett, and my son, the boy I raised alone, the boy I wiped tears off of and packed school lunches for, hired another woman to play my role at his wedding. Trust me, you'll regret skipping this story. So before you sit back and listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Grace's Truth. Now get in the mood to listen to this story, because it might be the ultimate sweet revenge. It arrived like a slap wrapped in a velvet glove, a wedding invitation tucked inside a perfectly pressed envelope. Ivory cardstock gold foil trim, Gregory's name etched in swirling calligraphy beside a name I barely knew: Sasha Bennett. There was no handwritten note, no phone call to say, "Mom, I'm getting married." Just a mass-mailed formality with RSVP instructions and a venue address that read more like a castle than anything resembling the world we came from. I stood at my kitchen counter, fingers trembling, rereading the names as if I'd missed something. Was I imagining the coldness, the absence of a warm, "We'd love to have you"? Then I saw it. Small, neat type. Mother of the groom, Mrs. Marla Whitaker. My breath caught in my throat. Who the hell was Marla Whitaker? I flipped the card over, scanned the back, checked again. My name, Lorraine Barrett, was nowhere. No mention. Not even a polite, "Lorraine Barrett seated in the family row." Just nothing. For a moment, I couldn't feel my hands. The house was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your own heartbeat sound intrusive. I moved to the living room, sat on the arm of the couch, and stared at the fireplace mantel where Gregory's high school graduation photo still sat. He'd been smiling then. A real smile. I remembered how proud he was that day. I remembered pressing his gown flat with an iron, sewing his name into the hem like some invisible mother's signature. And now someone else, a name I didn't recognize, would walk him down the aisle. Was this a mistake? No, Gregory may have become distant over the years. Fewer calls, shorter visits. Slowly replacing holidays with excuses, but this was intentional. I took a long breath. And then I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I sat down and cried. Quietly. Not the kind of crying that demands to be noticed. The kind that comes from a bone-deep betrayal. The kind that curls into the corners of your ribs and lingers for days. 3 days later, I received a second envelope. This one handwritten with a small card inside. "Hi, Lorraine. We're thrilled to have you join us at the rehearsal dinner. Seating will be arranged, see the included schedule. Sasha and Greg. No mom. No warmth. Just an administrative courtesy." I stared at that card for a long while, wondering what kind of man my son had become. Or worse, what kind of man he always was, and I simply failed to see. But I wasn't going to miss it. Not because I believed I still had a place in his heart, but because I had a right to witness the truth with my own eyes. The rehearsal dinner was held at a sprawling estate, all glass walls and soft jazz waiters in black suits, handing out hors d'oeuvres I couldn't pronounce. I wore navy, elegant, understated, the same dress I wore at his college graduation. The one he said made me look like a senator's wife. I spotted Gregory across the room. He was laughing, a glass of champagne in one hand, his other arm around a tall woman I presumed was Sasha. He didn't see me at first, but Sasha did. She made eye contact across the room, smiled like someone who's just seen a ghost, and whispered something into Gregory's ear. His face stiffened. He walked toward me like a man headed into a dentist appointment, polite, braced, mechanical. "Hi, Mom," he said, brushing my cheek with a quick kiss. "Glad you could make it." I smiled tightly. "Thank you for the invitation," though I noticed a rather interesting name on the program. He blinked, then looked over my shoulder like someone checking for an exit. "Oh, that, it's just, Sasha's family has a certain image. Marla's, someone who fits that mold better." That mold. I was not the mold. He said it like it was logistics, like I was a variable that didn't suit the branding of his new life. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I stood there. I swallowed the heat in my throat, and I told him, "I see." And I did. I saw everything. The next morning, I stood in front of the full-length mirror in the hotel suite they'd arranged for me, far from the bridal party's rooms, of course. My reflection looked composed, but my insides were jagged. I'd barely slept turning over the words Gregory had said. She fits the mold better. That phrase had carved itself into my brain like a cruel engraving. A mold. Since when did motherhood come with terms and aesthetics? Since when did love get replaced by brand identity? But I didn't cry again. Not this time. I was done offering grief to people who saw me as inconvenient. When I arrived at the rehearsal venue, a sun-drenched greenhouse garden with rows of white chairs and floral arches, I saw her. Marla, the woman playing me. She wore a soft lavender suit, heels, and a hat perched at just the right tilt. Her posture was perfect, her smile polite, even warm. She looked like every woman from Gregory's fiancé's world, elegant, measured, and thoroughly scripted. And there he was, Gregory holding her elbow, gently introducing her to guests. I stood off to the side, unnoticed, unacknowledged, until Sasha spotted me. She approached with the glide of someone raised in high-end social circles. Her smile was gracious, but her eyes sharp. "Lorraine," she said, kissing the air beside my cheek. "So glad you made it. Everything running smoothly at the hotel?" "Yes," I said simply. I wasn't about to play the part of grateful guest. She gestured toward Marla, who was laughing now with some elderly guests. "That's Marla," she said casually, as if I were asking who catered the event. "She's a friend of the family. We thought she might help things go more smoothly image-wise." "You mean I said my voice even she fits the mold?" Sasha blinked, then gave a tiny, tight smile. "You understand. I understand that my son has decided I'm not enough for his life anymore." Her lips parted like she wanted to protest, but she didn't. Instead, she said, "Gregory's nervous. He just wants everything to be perfect." Perfect. That word again. This wasn't about nerves. It was about rewriting a life story in which I'd been deemed too rough, too poor, too real to be included. So instead, they hired a woman with no ties to my son, no memories of him scraping knees or crying over college rejections, just the right dress and practiced smile. I walked away before Sasha could say anything else. And then I did something I didn't expect. I approached Marla. She turned to me with grace, holding out a hand. "You must be Lorraine?" I nodded, shaking her hand. "I am." She looked me in the eye, not with pity, with curiosity. "I just wanted to say," she began. "I hope you're okay. I didn't realize the full story." My stomach tightened. "The full story. I was told you were unavailable, that Gregory's mother had passed." She gave a nervous little laugh. You can imagine my surprise. I said nothing. I didn't need to. She looked down, her composure wavering. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. I left her standing there, dignity intact but heart sinking. She hadn't known. But Gregory had lied. He hadn't just erased me from the photos. He'd erased me from the truth. At the luncheon afterward, I sat at a distant table while Marla was seated front and center. Someone toasted her. Toasted her, calling her the elegant woman who raised such a fine man. I nearly choked on my water. I watched her nod, accept the praise, even tear up a little, and I realized something. This wasn't just betrayal. This was replacement. When Gregory finally passed by my table, he barely made eye contact. "Glad you're here," he muttered before slipping away again. That was all I got. After 28 years of sacrifices, birthdays, scraped knees, late-night ER visits, and holding him through his father's abandonment, I got 4 words. "Glad you're here." I sat quietly through the rest of the meal. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. Because I wasn't going to fight to prove I was his mother. I knew I was. But something inside me changed that day, a kind of severing. Not out of hate. Not even resentment. Out of truth. I finally saw Gregory for who he'd become. or maybe always was. And I made a quiet vow to myself I would no longer beg for space in a story I built with my own hands. The morning of the wedding arrived, and with it, a strange kind of silence in my chest. Not calm, not clarity. Something else, like the breath you hold before the wave hits. I moved through the motions as if underwater. Charcoal gray silk dress, modest neckline, pearl earrings ones. Gregory gave me the day he got his first paycheck out of college. I almost didn't wear them, but something in me said, let them see the truth, even if they pretend it never existed. I arrived at the vineyard early, though it didn't matter. Nothing I did now could fix what had already been decided. Rows of white chairs curved around a floral arch dripping with roses. String instruments played something slow and lilting like a lullaby meant to dull sharp edges. I walked to the usher, offered my name. He scanned his tablet and frowned. I'm sorry, ma'am. You're not listed under the family seating. My breath caught, but my voice didn't waver. I'm the groom's mother. The usher hesitated, eyes darting. I was told the groom's mother is already seated. There it was. Confirmation. In those 7 words, the whole cruel farce. Already seated. Of course she was. They gave me a seat in the 3rd row from the back, practically behind a floral arrangement. As I sat, I saw the front row, the place where I should have been, and there she was. Marla. Perfect posture, subtle pearls, sitting beside Gregory's father, yes, him. The man who vanished when Gregory was 5, who never paid a dime of child support, now seated like a proud patriarch. Marla leaned toward him and said something. They laughed, and my heart folded in on itself. I should have been angry, but what I felt was something quieter, something colder, a dull ache behind my ribs that pulsed with each beat of the quartet's strings. I had raised Gregory, stayed up all night with him during his asthma attacks, worked double shifts to pay for his college textbooks. And now the man I built with my bare hands had replaced me with a woman he barely knew because she fit the fantasy better. The music shifted. Everyone rose. Sasha appeared gliding down the aisle like a porcelain figurine. She was breathtaking, I won't lie. All lace and softness, but beside her, arm linked with hers, was Marla. She wasn't just attending the wedding. She was walking my son down the aisle, my hands clenched in my lap. I stared, unblinking. Not out of shock, I was past that now. But to record it. To remember it exactly. Because someday he would pretend it didn't happen this way, and I wanted to remember. All of it. People cried. They took photos. Gregory kissed Marla on the cheek at the altar. No one looked back at me. I could have vanished from the earth and not a soul would have noticed. The ceremony passed like a dream someone else was living. I heard the officiant say forever. I heard the vows, the kiss. But it all felt distant, like I was listening through glass. Then came the family portraits. Mother of the groom, a photographer called out. Marla stepped forward. There were no corrections, no confusion. I stood off to the side and watched her slide into place as if it had always been hers. At the reception, I sat near the edge of the dance floor, alone, forgotten. Champagne flutes clinked. Laughter floated around the room. Gregory and Sasha made their rounds like royalty. I watched him joke with uncles he hadn't seen in years. He held Sasha's hand like it was made of crystal. Finally, he came to my table. He didn't sit, didn't even lean close. Thanks for coming, Mom, he said almost out of obligation. That's all you have to say? I asked, my voice low but sharp. He sighed. Let's not do this here. Then when I asked, when is it convenient to be erased? His eyes flicked around the room, scanning for eavesdroppers. You weren't erased. Gregory. You had another woman walk you down the aisle. You told guests I was dead. He didn't deny it. Instead, he said, they wouldn't have understood. Sasha's family expects a certain look, a certain background. I didn't want to embarrass you. That word again. Embarrass. I leaned back, breath steady. You didn't want to embarrass me, but you had no trouble embarrassing yourself. He stiffened. I continued. You're ashamed of me, Gregory. Of who we really are. The late nights. The bounced checks. The secondhand clothes I wore to your award ceremonies. His voice dropped. It's not that simple. But it is. You want a life that pretends the hard parts never existed. And to do that, you had to rewrite me out of the story. He looked tired, not guilty, just tired. Like this conversation was one more mess to clean up before the next toast. He left without saying goodbye. I sat there for a long time, watching other mothers dance with their sons, watching Marla take pictures. And then something in me snapped. Not in fury, but in finality. He had chosen. And now so would I. I stood up, smoothed my dress, walked to the exit. No fanfare, no tears. Just the quiet click of my heels on marble, and a vow forming in my chest. You cannot replace someone who carved the road you walk on. He could bury my name under glossy programs and curated smiles. But I would not bury myself. I didn't go home right away after leaving the wedding reception. The hotel room Sasha's family had arranged for me suddenly felt like enemy territory. Too sterile, too close. Instead, I sat in my car in the vineyard's gravel parking lot, windows rolled down, listening to the faint echo of music spilling from the grand hall. The soft murmurs of laughter and toasts drifted into the night like perfume I no longer recognized. I didn't cry. I just sat, like a statue in the dark. And then, I opened my phone, not to text Gregory, not to call him, but to scroll through social media, the digital scrapbook of curated truths and omissions. And sure enough, there it was. A perfect day. Surrounded by love. Beneath it, a picture of Gregory and Marla. The caption, "My mother, my rock." I stared at it. My thumb hovered over the screen, trembling not from rage but recognition. I wasn't even surprised anymore. I was simply hollow. But then I noticed something peculiar. In the comments, someone wrote, "Wait, isn't that your godmother? I thought your real mom passed?" Another wrote, "Beautiful woman. Looks nothing like you, though." And beneath those, Gregory's replies, vague and deflecting. Long story. Just glad she was there. Glad she was there. The woman he hired. Glad she was there. Instead of me. But what stuck out wasn't the lie. It was the fact that he was covering it up. Still working hard to conceal me, to spin a fiction. And in that moment, something inside me lit up. A spark. Not for revenge. For clarity. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. My mind was whirring like it hadn't in years. A mother's instincts are never dormant, they're just quiet until provoked. By sunrise, I had a plan. First, I needed to speak to someone who wouldn't feed me sugar-coated excuses. So I called my sister. Clara lived 2 states away and had never gotten along with Gregory. She said he was too polished, too pretty boy, too full of ambition and entitlement. But she loved me, and she'd never lied to me. When she answered, I didn't say hello. I simply asked, "Do you remember the last time Gregory visited you?" She sighed through the receiver. When he showed up with Sasha and pretended he was the CEO of his company when he was still mid-level management. "Yeah. Why did he mention me?" There was a pause. Then, "No. Actually, he said he was raised mostly by his grandmother while you were off chasing work." I let it go at the time. But now it made sense. He'd been rehearsing this version of his life long before the wedding, slowly replacing the messy parts with cleaner ones, scrubbing away my love because it didn't fit into his designer-tinted narrative. "Clara." I whispered he had another woman pretend to be me at his wedding. Silence. Then the sound of her breath catching. "He did what?" Her outrage comforted me in a way nothing else could. She didn't try to downplay it, didn't make excuses, just pure, raw disgust at what he'd done. "He's trying to bury me," I said. "But he can't," Clara said, "because you are the only one who knows the whole damn story." Those words rang like a bell inside me. She was right. I knew the truth of Gregory. And if he didn't want to own it, fine, but I could. 2 days after the wedding, I made a visit to an old friend who used to work at the local paper, now semi-retired and freelancing online. Her name was Denise, and she owed me a favor. Back in the day, I'd helped her care for her dying mother when no one else would. Now I sat at her kitchen table explaining what had happened. I wasn't crying. I wasn't even angry. I was just ready to be heard. She stared at me wide-eyed. "You want to tell your side? I want the truth out there," I said. Not in a vengeful way, but in a way that can't be erased anymore. She nodded slowly. "A personal essay or a letter? To my son. To the world. I don't care what you call it. Just let them see who I really am." We worked on it for hours. I spoke. She typed. My hands were too shaky to write it myself. I told her about Gregory's childhood, our nights scraping by on instant noodles the day he got into college, how he cried on my shoulder when Sasha almost broke up with him during their first year of dating. And then, I told her about the wedding, about being sat in the back, about Marla, about the lie that I had died. Denise's fingers paused at that line. "He told people you were dead?" I nodded. He didn't say it directly, but he let it be believed, because it was easier than owning who I really was. We finished the piece just before midnight. She titled it, "The Mother Behind the Curtain." It was published 2 days later on a lifestyle blog she occasionally contributed to. Nothing big, but enough. Enough for it to be shared. And shared it was. Within 48 hours, the article had been reposted, linked on forums, even picked up by a podcast that read it aloud with the title, "Erased the Real Mother's Story." I didn't include names. I didn't have to. People knew. The ones who mattered knew. That evening, Gregory called. My phone buzzed once. Twice. Then a text. "What the hell did you do?" Then another. "You're ruining my life." I didn't respond. Because for once I wasn't part of his life to ruin anymore. I was simply telling my truth. And truth, I had learned, has its own quiet power. One that doesn't need permission. The doorbell rang at exactly 7:13 p.m. I knew it would be him before I even looked through the window. Gregory didn't text again after those last angry messages. He didn't call. But I could feel him brewing. His silence wasn't stillness, it was steam, building behind a sealed lid. And when the story went viral enough that his boss emailed him a link with the subject line, "Is this about your family?" I knew it was only a matter of time. Now here he was. He wore a fitted blazer, no tie, and shoes too polished for a man whose mother had been seated in the back row of his wedding. He looked taller than I remembered. Or maybe I was just smaller in his eyes now. I opened the door but didn't move aside. We stood there for a breath, me holding the frame, him holding his tongue. "You're just going to stand there and not say anything?" he finally asked. I studied him. "I figured you'd have your speech rehearsed." He sighed, then walked past me into the house like he used to when he was 16 and defiant. "I want you to take it down," he said, spinning toward me in the living room. "No," I said flatly. "It's humiliating," he snapped. "Do you know how many people have forwarded it to me?" "My colleagues, Sasha's friends. Her mother is livid." "Good," I said quietly. He blinked. "Good." I stepped into the room slowly. "Yes. Because for once, someone other than me gets to feel what it's like to be ashamed." He stared at me, stunned. I didn't flinch. "You told people I was dead, Gregory. I never said—" "You never corrected them." "That's the same thing." He started pacing fast. "I was protecting you. Protecting myself. You don't understand what it's like trying to survive in circles like Sasha's. They judge everything: where you came from, what your parents did, how many vowels are in your last name. You raised me to be better than our beginnings, remember? No, I said sharply. I raised you to be proud of how far you came, not ashamed of where you started. He opened his mouth, but I kept going. I fed you when I couldn't afford to feed myself. I walked you to school in the rain when our car broke down. I worked night shifts in a hospital laundry room so you could get braces, piano lessons, math tutors. You know what I used to tell myself on those nights when I came home to a sleeping boy in a 2-bedroom apartment filled with secondhand furniture. He stayed quiet. That it would be worth it. That one day you'd see me from a podium or a wedding aisle or across a room and say, "That's my mother. Everything I am, I owe to her." He looked away, and then had the audacity to call it love. He sank into the armchair he used to crawl into with picture books. He rubbed his hands together slowly. "I didn't mean to hurt you. You meant to protect your image," I said. "And in doing so, you destroyed mine." He took a deep breath and finally whispered, "It was Dad." I paused. "What?" He swallowed. "When I reached out to him years ago after college, he said you'd poisoned him against me, that you kept him away, that if he'd raised me, I'd be someone more respected." I sat down slowly across from him, my legs suddenly unsure. "He told me all these things about you," Gregory continued. "How you refused to let him see me, that you turned me against him so you'd stay the hero." My mouth opened, but no sound came out. "You believed him," I finally said softly. He nodded once. "At first." And then Sasha started pushing me to let go of old wounds, to reinvent myself. I thought, maybe he was right. Maybe if I cut the past loose, I could finally be the man I wanted to be. "And that man doesn't include me," I said, finishing it for him. He shook his head, but it was too late. "You never asked me what happened," I said. "Do you want to know the truth now?" He didn't answer. But I told him anyway. "Your father cheated. Left. And when he came crawling back, I said no. I told him he'd have to go through the courts to earn a place in your life, and he refused. He wanted everything on his terms. When he couldn't control it, he blamed me. And apparently, you believe that?" Gregory looked crushed. He sank lower into the chair. I let the silence linger. Let it stretch. Finally, I said, "You hurt me, Gregory. Deeply. But the worst part, you made me feel like I didn't matter, like my motherhood was a transaction you outgrew." He wiped at his eyes, silent. "But I'll survive it," I continued. "Because I've survived worse. You are the best and worst parts of my past, and I will no longer let you define how much of me deserves to be seen." He looked up, tears brimming. "I'm sorry, Mom." I believed him. But sorry was just the beginning. I stood. "You don't get to rewrite me anymore. But if you want to write the next chapter together, you'll have to start by telling the truth. Loudly, publicly, or not at all." He nodded. Then he left. No hugs, no promises. Just a door closing gently behind him, and a mother standing tall, finally no longer waiting to be seen. The next morning, I woke before dawn. Not out of habit or anxiety, but out of something else, a sense that the tide had shifted and I was no longer drifting in it. For the first time in years, I felt grounded in my own story. And it was a strange kind of peace. The house was still dark. I made tea instead of coffee. I wanted quiet, not adrenaline. As the kettle whistled, I stood at the window watching the sky tint itself a soft gray blue, the early light brushing over the branches outside like a hesitant apology. Gregory hadn't called since the night he showed up. No text, no email. But I didn't need him to not right away. Our reckoning wasn't a single storm, it was a season that would pass in waves. I sipped my tea and opened my laptop. Denise had emailed me sometime around 2:30 a.m. Subject: you might want to see this attachment screenshot.png. I opened it. It was a public Facebook post from Gregory. I didn't follow him. He'd quietly unfriended me years ago, but Denise did. And now I read his words, stunned. To those who read the essay about the mother who was erased, yes, it's about me. And yes, it's true. I made choices that I can't undo. I hurt someone who gave everything for me because I thought fitting in was more important than standing up. To the real woman who raised me, who loved me when I was small and sick and scared, I am sorry. You are not replaceable. I was just too blind to see that sooner. No hashtags, no embellishments, no image to soften it. Just words, heavy and unvarnished. And they were public. Denise was right. I did want to see that. But not for the reasons she probably thought. It wasn't vindication I craved, it was validation. That the truth once spoken could ripple. I spent the rest of the morning doing something I hadn't done in years, tending my garden. I trimmed the azaleas, pulled weeds from the walkway, bricks repotted the stubborn rosemary plant by the porch that had nearly died 3 times. My hands worked in soil, and it felt biblical, like I was unearthing something I'd buried in myself. At noon, my neighbor Teresa came over with a pie and awkward eyes. I read the article she said standing just shy of my porch steps. I didn't know Lorraine, about all of it. I smiled soft. Most people didn't. She looked down at the pie. I just wanted to say, you deserved better. And I'm sorry I ever assumed things I didn't understand. That broke something in me, not in a painful way, but in a healing way. Like scar tissue cracking to make room for new skin. Thank you, I said, and I meant it. By the end of that week, 3 more people reached out. A woman I used to work with at the florist's shop. An old friend from Gregory's elementary school PTA. Even Clara, my sister, called just to say, your words hit deeper than you know. It was strange. I hadn't set out to make a movement, but something about telling my truth, no matter how raw, had loosened something in others. And then came the email. From a podcast producer. She introduced herself as Maya. I run a show called Family Lines. We feature stories from parents, children, and the sometimes heartbreaking gaps between them. We'd love to interview you, only if you're ready. I stared at it for a long time. And then I replied, I am. Recording the episode was harder than I expected. Not because I couldn't talk about it, but because hearing my own voice speak those words out loud made it real in a new way. Maya asked questions that weren't sensational. She was gentle, but direct. What was the moment you realized you were no longer in your son's story? What did it feel like to sit behind a woman pretending to be you? And the hardest, if your son was listening right now, what would you say to him? Not as the woman he rejected, but as the mother who still remembers the boy he used to be. I paused for a long time before answering. Then I said I would tell him that I loved him before he had a name, that I forgave him long before he ever asked, but I won't pretend anymore. I won't shrink myself just to fit his version of comfort. If he wants a relationship now, he'll have to build it on real ground. Maya's silence told me I'd said something true. The episode aired 2 weeks later, and then the messages poured in. Mothers, sons, daughters, women who'd been erased, fathers who'd disappeared, people who had both failed and been failed. It was overwhelming. Not in a loud way, but in a deeply human one. One message stood out: I haven't spoken to my mother in 7 years. I thought she was holding me back. But after hearing you, I realized I was just afraid of facing my own shame. I'm calling her tomorrow. Another you made me feel seen, for the first time in decades. By the time Gregory reached out again, a month had passed. He texted me, Mom, I listened to the podcast. Can we meet? Not to fix everything. Just to talk. I didn't respond right away. I gave it a day. Not to punish him, but to remind myself that I had power now. that I was no longer waiting by the phone for scraps of recognition. Then I wrote back, yes, but this time you come here. And we sit. And we talk like equals. No performances, no masks. Just the truth. He replied simply, okay. That meeting would come. But for now, I stood on my back porch as the wind picked up through the trees. The sun warmed my hands. And for once, the weight on my shoulders wasn't grief. It was freedom. Gregory pulled up exactly at 3:00 p.m. sharp. The sound of his car engine, once so familiar from when he used to race into the driveway after soccer practice, now arrived like a ghost pressing on my chest. But I didn't move. I sat still in the kitchen, watching through the sheer curtain as he stepped out, glanced around like a boy, unsure if he was welcome, and adjusted the collar of his jacket. He hadn't brought flowers, not a gift, not even a nervous coffee offering. That somehow made it more honest. When I opened the door, I didn't force a smile. He didn't either. We simply looked at each other for a beat, then nodded in silent agreement. Time to talk. I led him into the kitchen where 2 mugs of tea were already steeping. I'd set them out not as a gesture of warmth, but because rituals matter. Sharing tea meant we were not enemies, even if we were not quite family either. He sat down slowly, eyes scanning the room. His gaze landed on the corkboard near the fridge where old photos of him still hung: his kindergarten portrait, a Polaroid, from a summer camping trip, his college graduation, and the picture from his high school prom, me beside him, my arm hooked through his, my smile wide and exhausted. You kept those, he said. I raised that boy, I answered. He looked down. I listened to the podcast again, he said after a pause. The part where you said if I wanted a relationship, it would have to be built on real ground. I said nothing. I want that, he added quietly, but I asked already, hearing it in his breath. But I don't know how. I stirred my tea slowly, letting the spoon clink against the ceramic. You start by not asking me to pretend I wasn't erased. He nodded. I won't. We sat in silence, the kind that doesn't stretch awkwardly but carefully, like we were building something from silence itself. I've been in therapy, he said, for the first time in my life. That surprised me. I looked up. My therapist told me I've been performing family instead of living it, he continued, pretending everything was curated, managing appearances. Even when I was a kid. I stayed quiet. I think he said slowly, I blamed you for the instability of my childhood, even though you were the only one holding things together. He paused. And then I blame myself. Because I saw how tired you were, how much you gave up for me. And I didn't want to be a reflection of your sacrifices. I wanted to be something cleaner, something polished. I finally spoke. So you replaced the mother who scraped by with one who looked good in wedding photos. He winced. I thought if I could rewrite the beginning, the rest of the story would feel lighter. And did it? I asked. No, he whispered. It only made everything heavier. He looked at me then. Really looked. The way he hadn't in years. You're the reason I became strong, he said. And I hated that. I hated needing to owe you that much. It was a brutal confession, but it was honest. You were never in my debt, Gregory, I said, voice steady. Love isn't a ledger, but I made it one, he said, his voice breaking slightly. I made you pay for the fact that you were human. My hands resting on my lap curled slowly into loose fists. I wanted you to be invincible, he said. So when I saw your pain, I didn't know what to do with it. So I buried it. And then I buried you. There it was. The truth I hadn't known I needed to hear. You know, I said slowly, I could forgive the wedding. The seat in the back. Even the woman pretending to be me. But what hurt the most, what left the deepest cut, was realizing you weren't even planning to tell your children about me. He looked up, startled. Denise showed me a draft of your future baby announcement. First child of Gregory and Sasha, proudly welcomed by Marla and Richard. He swallowed hard. You were planning to erase me forever, I said. Even after I died. He lowered his head. I don't deserve forgiveness. You don't get to decide what you deserve, I said quietly. But you do get to decide who you become next. We let that sit for a while. Outside, a bird tapped against the window pane and fluttered away. The day was cloudy now, shadows spilling across the table in quiet shapes. Gregory finally reached into his coat pocket and placed a small folded letter on the table. I wrote this after I saw your photo board. I know I can't undo the past. But I wanted you to have something written in my own words. I didn't touch it. Not yet. He stood to leave. I'm not expecting you to forgive me today. Or tomorrow. But if you ever want to try again, I'll be here. At the door, he paused. I'm telling Sasha everything, he added. No more lies. She can decide what kind of man she married. That perhaps more than anything meant something. And then he was gone. I sat alone with the letter for a long time. When I finally opened it, it began like this. Dear Mom, I called someone else mother on the most important day of my life. But it's your name I whispered when I got the job, when I almost lost Sasha, when I didn't know who I was. You were always there, even when I pretended you weren't. I don't deserve to be called your son, but I'm hoping someday you'll still choose to say my name. I folded it carefully and placed it in the drawer beside the old photos. I didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, I stood up, poured the rest of the tea down the sink, and opened the window wide to let in the cold air. It smelled like something shifting, like something beginning. The next morning, I did something that once felt unimaginable. I reopened my old email account. Not the one I'd been using for bills and newsletters, but the original one, Mom Lorraine 43, the address I'd created when Gregory first learned how to write emails as a teenager. I had nearly forgotten the password. My fingers hesitated over the keys, but then muscle memory took over. 3 tries later, I was in. The inbox was dusty, cluttered with old subscription messages and long dead threads, but nestled in between them were a few subject lines that stopped me cold. College move-in weekend. Can you send that meatloaf recipe? Just needed to vent. Don't tell Sasha. The last one was from 6 years ago. I clicked it open. Mom, I know we don't talk about this kind of stuff, but sometimes I think about Dad. Not because I miss him, but because I'm still angry. You always told me anger is a compass. It points toward what we needed but didn't get. I needed him to be something he wasn't. And sometimes I think I needed you to be someone you couldn't be either. But I'm still grateful you were always there. Even when I didn't say it. Just needed to say that. Please don't bring it up. Love you. I stared at that last line. That afternoon I went for a walk through the park. It was the same one I used to bring Gregory to as a toddler, wrapped in his yellow windbreaker, chasing ducks and asking too many questions about clouds. The trees had grown older just like me. Their branches drooped a little lower, leaves burned orange with the weight of October. I found a bench and sat, letting the quiet settle around me. An older man walked past with his granddaughter. She was carrying a drawing, a clumsy crayon version of a tree with red scribbles for apples. He bent to kiss her on the head, then pointed to her paper, asking questions, delighting in her answers like they were poetry. My throat tightened. All those years I had dreamed of being a grandmother, of baking cookies, patching scraped knees, telling bedtime stories that started with when your dad was your age. And for a time, I believed I had missed that chance entirely. But now maybe that door wasn't fully shut. Maybe there was still time. Back at home, I opened Gregory's letter again. I read it out loud this time. I needed to hear it. In my voice. In my space. You were always there. Even when I pretended you weren't. I whispered the words twice like a mantra. Then I sat at my desk and began to write. Dear Gregory, you erased me once, but I will not erase you. I still have every birthday card you ever drew by hand, Every photograph, even the ones where we were fighting. Every voicemail you left me when you forgot your apartment key in college. You were my life's purpose, and I do not regret a second of it, even now. But here's what I need from you. I need you to stop hiding behind shame, to let your daughter or son know where they came from, to know that their grandmother is not a shadow, but a woman with a voice. I will not beg to be in your life. But if you open the door again, really open it, you may find that the love you buried is still there, alive, waiting, stronger than you imagined. Love, Mom. I folded the letter and placed it in an envelope, even though I knew I'd end up texting him a photo of it first. Paper carried weight, but digital carried immediacy. A week passed, then another, until one evening my phone buzzed with a photo. Gregory standing next to a woman with long black curls and an unmistakable belly bump. Sasha. The caption read, "She wants to meet you." We both do. Will you come to dinner next Sunday? I read the message 3 times before answering. Yes, I'd like that. That Sunday, I stood outside their home, one I had never seen in person, only in photos. Gregory opened the door before I could knock. He looked nervous. He looked younger somehow. Behind him, Sasha appeared barefoot, glowing, tentative but kind. She stepped forward and offered me something unexpected. A hug. "Lorraine," she said softly. "Thank you for coming." Inside the table was already set. Not formal, not overly polished, just homey. A roast, some greens, fresh bread. A small candle flickering between us. I sat down. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a ghost. I felt like a mother again. During dessert, Sasha reached under the table and pulled out a small box. "We wanted to give you something." I opened it carefully. Inside was a charm bracelet. One tiny gold charm already dangled from the chain. It was the letter L. "For Lorraine," she said. "And for love." We plan to add more charms. One for every grandchild. One for every moment we get to rewrite together. My throat closed, but I nodded. And for the first time since that awful wedding day, I allowed myself to believe in a future I thought I'd lost. The invitation arrived in a cream-colored envelope sealed with a gold sticker shaped like a tiny baby rattle. Inside the script read, "Please join us to celebrate the upcoming arrival of baby Barrett, hosted by Sasha and Marla." Marla. The name hit me like a cold wind. She wasn't just the godmother. She was the woman who stood in my place at Gregory's wedding. The woman who'd smiled beside him in photos, posed with him during the mother-son dance, toasted beside him as if she'd raised him. And now, she would be hosting his baby shower. My fingers trembled as I held the invitation. Gregory had told me she was just family to Sasha, but deep down, I suspected more. Marla had been his replacement mother, his buffer, his performance. And now, despite everything, she was still involved. I set the invitation down on the kitchen counter and stared at it for a long time. It felt like a test, or a trap. Would I go, or would I stay home and once again be erased? 2 days later, I sent my RSVP. Yes, not because I wanted to be in the same room as Marla, but because this was my grandchild, and I refused to let my presence remain conditional. The baby shower was held in Sasha and Gregory's backyard. The weather was golden, cloudless, and warm, the kind of day that begged you to feel hopeful. White chairs dotted the lawn, decorated with soft pink and blue streamers. A table held finger sandwiches, mocktails, and tiny cupcakes topped with edible pacifiers. When I arrived, Sasha greeted me first. She looked radiant, 8 months pregnant, barefoot in a pale floral dress, cheeks flushed with joy and nerves. "Lorraine," she said, touching my arm gently, "I'm so glad you came." Then Gregory appeared. He kissed my cheek. "You look beautiful, Mom." I managed a smile. "You sound surprised." He laughed nervously. But my eyes were already scanning the yard. There she was. Marla stood near the lemonade station wearing a coral blouse and a wide hat. She laughed too loudly, held court with two women I didn't recognize. She hadn't seen me yet, and when she did, her smile faltered. Just slightly. A flicker in the eye. But it was there. She approached with a practiced grace. "Lorraine," she said, arms open. "So lovely to finally meet you." Finally, we'd already met indirectly, tragically at the wedding. But I smiled. "Marla, I've heard things." She chuckled like it was a joke, but it wasn't. "I hope only good ones." I said nothing. We stood in silence, both of us knowing what hung between us wasn't just awkwardness, it was history. Stolen moments. Erasure. She had stepped into a role that wasn't hers, and she hadn't stepped back. Then she lowered her voice. "I didn't know you'd be here," she said with an edge that was almost a whisper of accusation. "I live here now," I said plainly. "In the story. Where I've always belonged." Her smile cracked a little. "Of course," she said. "Of course you do." The games began. Guess the baby food. Write wishes for the baby. Measure Sasha's belly with string. I sat beside Denise, who had arrived an hour earlier. She'd always been my anchor, the one person who never questioned my truth. "Is it just me," she whispered, "or is Marla acting like she planned her own coronation?" I stifled a laugh. Then Sasha stood up, her hands gently rubbing her stomach. "I just want to thank you all for being here," she said. "This baby is so loved already. And I'm especially grateful for the women who shaped Gregory and me into the parents we hope to be." She turned slightly. "To Marla for always being a steady presence in my life." Marla beamed. "And to Lorraine for raising Gregory with love, sacrifice, and strength. We're both lucky to have you." For a second, no one clapped. The silence was thick. Then Gregory stood and started applauding. Others followed, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't applauding someone else. I was being applauded. After the shower, as guests trickled away, I lingered to help clean up. Marla approached quietly. "That was quite a moment," she said. "Sasha never mentioned you'd be thanked." "I didn't need to be thanked," I said. "But I deserve to be." She looked at me, and something changed in her expression. Less smug, more real. "Look, I'm not the villain here." "No," I said. "You're not? But you knew what role you were playing, and you didn't question it." "I thought I was helping," she said. "Gregory was lost. Sasha wanted peace. I filled in." "Filling in isn't the same as belonging," I said. "And from now on I won't be filled over." She studied me. "You're stronger than I imagined." "I always was," I said. "You just didn't look hard enough." That evening, Sasha texted me. "Thank you for coming today. And for being gracious with Marla. It meant more than you know." And then another text followed. From Gregory. "I know today was hard, but I saw you. Really saw you. And I'm proud to be your son." I closed my phone and stared at the ceiling in bed. Proud. He had said he was proud, not out of obligation, not on a stage, but quietly, privately, sincerely. And maybe that was what healing looked like. Not a perfect ending, but a true beginning. 2 weeks passed after the baby shower, and my life, oddly enough, returned to a rhythm I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't routine exactly. It was something deeper, like I'd finally stepped back into a role I'd long been denied, not because I fought for it, but because I simply stopped apologizing for wanting it. Then one morning, I received a phone call. "Hi, is this Lorraine Barrett?" the woman's voice asked. "Yes," I answered, instantly guarded. "This is Tessa Lane. I'm a writer with Family Unfolded. It's an online publication focusing on intergenerational family stories and healing. We've followed your story ever since the Family Lines podcast aired." I blinked. "Okay, we're doing a special feature on maternal estrangement and reconciliation. Your interview resonated with our editorial board. Would you be willing to share your experience in a long-form essay? In your own words? My throat tightened. You want me to write it? Yes. We'll edit, support, and structure the final piece, but the voice it needs to be yours. For a moment, I was silent. Part of me still resisted the idea of becoming a story for strangers to pick over. But another part, the deeper, steadier part, understood the power of testimony. Especially for women like me, whose truths had been edited out of their own family albums. I'll do it, I said, surprising even myself. The next week, I began writing. Each morning, I made tea, opened my laptop, and sat at the sun-drenched kitchen table with a single photo of Gregory at age 5, propped beside me. It anchored me not to guilt or nostalgia, but to purpose. I wrote about how I used to measure my days in school lunches and carpool schedules, about the quiet grief that came when that job, the most sacred one I'd ever known, was taken from me without warning. About how motherhood doesn't expire even when you're pushed out of the frame. I didn't write with bitterness. I wrote with clarity. 2 weeks later, I submitted the first draft. Tessa called me the next day, her voice trembling with emotion. Lorraine, this isn't just an essay, it's a mirror for so many women. We'd like to feature it as our cover story for Mother's Day. Mother's Day. That day had been a quiet ache in my life for years. A reminder of silences, of cards I never received, of brunches I was never invited to. Are you sure? I asked. We are, she said, and we'd love to photograph you for it. A week later, a photographer named Jay arrived at my house. He was soft-spoken, gentle, and had that rare ability to make you forget the camera was even there. We shot in my garden, in the kitchen, and on the front porch. At one point, he asked me to hold something that represented my motherhood journey. Without hesitation, I brought out a faded drawing Gregory had made in 3rd grade, a stick figure family, me, him, and a crooked house with the words, "My mom is my hero." Jay didn't ask why I chose it. He just nodded and took the photo. The article went live the Friday before Mother's Day. By Sunday morning, it had been shared over 60,000 times. The title, "The Woman in the Back Row," a mother's story of being replaced and reclaimed. The comments flooded in. Some angry, some tearful, some raw. But most of all, they were grateful. Thank you for saying what so many of us never could. I'm printing this out and sending it to my daughter. You just changed the way I see my own mother. Even Sasha texted me. Your strength blows me away. I'm proud my daughter will have you in her life. And finally, Gregory called. Not texted, called. I read the piece 3 times, he said. Once to myself, once to Sasha, and once to our baby out loud. My chest swelled. She kicked while I read it, he added. Hard. I laughed. Good. She knows she comes from a line of fighters. There was a long pause on the other end. Then Gregory said something I'll never forget. I want our daughter to grow up hearing your voice, not just reading it. Will you record it for her? The article. As a keepsake? I couldn't speak for a moment. Then I whispered, yes. That night I sat in my small study and read my words into a recorder. At first my voice trembled, but then it steadied, grew warm, grew proud. I didn't cry. I didn't break. I claimed myself. Later that week, I mailed Gregory a small box. Inside was a flash drive with the recording, and beside it a note. For the next generation of truth-tellers, so they'll know they come from women who never gave up. I didn't expect to hear from Richard, but life has a strange way of dragging unfinished business back to your doorstep when you least want or need it. The knock came on a quiet Thursday morning. I was in the middle of deadheading the roses in the front yard when I saw the familiar gray sedan idle at the curb. For a moment, I thought it was someone lost or maybe one of the neighbor's visitors. But then the door opened, and out stepped Richard, my ex-husband, Gregory's father. The man who'd disappeared from both of our lives with the kind of silence that hums louder than a scream. He looked older, of course, softer in the face, paler in the eyes. Time had worn him down in ways I hadn't expected. His once sharp suit jackets had given way to a windbreaker and scuffed shoes. But still, something about him carried that same arrogance, a man who never had to explain himself because he thought life did the explaining for him. I didn't move from the garden. He walked slowly toward me, hands in his pockets, until he stood on the edge of the path. "Lorraine," he said with a nod. "Richard," I replied, snipping a rose cleanly from the stem. He stood there for a beat, waiting for me to invite him closer. I didn't. I read the article, he said. I looked up briefly, and it was truthful. That stopped me. Not because it was praise, it wasn't. It was the first time Richard had ever acknowledged truth as something he didn't own exclusively. "You made me sound like a ghost," he added. "You made yourself into one," I said. "I just wrote it down." His mouth twitched. "I didn't come to argue," he said. "I came because Gregory called me." That made me pause. Why he wanted to know what kind of father disappears from his son's life and then shows up at a wedding pretending everything's fine. I slowly stood and wiped my hands on my gardening apron. "And what did you tell him?" "The truth," he said. "That I was a coward. That I left when things got messy because I never learned how to be needed without resentment." That landed with a dull thud between us. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "Because," he said, "glancing around the yard for the first time, I realized Gregory got his strength from you. Not me. And it made me feel ashamed. Ashamed. From Richard. The man who once told me that motherhood was natural and therefore required no thanks. The man who disappeared when Gregory's tuition was due, when the fridge broke, when the nights were too long and my hope was too thin. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope. "I wrote you a letter. I didn't think I could say it to your face, but I wanted you to have it." I didn't take it immediately. "What's in it?" I asked. "A few regrets," he said. "A few apologies. And the rest, well, maybe something for Gregory to see one day." Only then did I reach for it. The paper was heavy, thick, handwritten. I slipped it into my apron pocket without opening it. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said. "Good," I replied, "because I'm not offering it." He nodded. "Fair." I stared at him for a long moment. Then I said, "Gregory's daughter is due next month." "I know," he said. "He invited me to the hospital." That made my stomach twist. "He asked if it was okay with you first," Richard added. That surprised me. He said, "She built me. If she's not comfortable, you won't be there." And with those words, something shifted in my chest. "He's growing," I murmured. "He is," Richard said. "And it's because of you." For the first time in a long, long time, I felt something unfamiliar pass between us. Not love, not forgiveness, but respect. Earned, not owed. He turned to go, then paused halfway down the walkway. "Lorraine." "Yes. I'm sorry for not standing beside you when it mattered." I said nothing. He nodded like that was enough. And maybe this once it was. That night I read the letter. It was messy. Scratched out words, sentences that wandered, phrases repeated twice. But it was real. He wrote about his fears, about watching Gregory cry as a child and not knowing how to hold him, about watching me carry the weight of the family and feeling irrelevant, then using that irrelevance as an excuse to disappear. He wrote about the wedding, how he felt shame seeing me seated in the back, and how he couldn't look me in the eye. And finally, he wrote this: "You were never the weak one, Lorraine. I was. And somehow, even after I walked away, you made our son into a man I can be proud of." I folded the letter and placed it in the same drawer where I'd kept Gregory's note. Because stories, real ones, are never clean. They don't end in grand speeches or perfect hugs. They end in acknowledgments. In truth, shared even belatedly. The The next day, I received a voicemail from Gregory. "Mom, I told Dad you get the first photo with the baby. Just wanted you to know that." I smiled. Not because I won, but because I had always been there and now finally so had the truth. The call came just before dawn. Sasha's voice was breathless but calm. "Lorraine, it's time. We're heading to the hospital now. She's coming." I was already dressed before she hung up. My hospital bag had been packed for weeks, not with essentials for me, but with tiny knitted booties, a worn paperback I planned to read in the waiting room, and a letter I had written to my future granddaughter the day I learned of her existence. The morning was still dark, the world suspended in a hush. As I drove through the sleepy streets, a strange steadiness settled over me. There had been so many versions of me in this journey forgotten. Mother, heartbroken, woman, silent observer. But this version was simple. I was becoming a grandmother, and no one could erase me from this chapter. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and coffee. I checked in at the front desk where a nurse gave me a visitor badge that read, L. Barrett Grandmother. I held it in my hand before putting it on, letting the meaning of it seep into my skin. A few minutes later, Gregory appeared. His hair was tousled, his eyes wide, but he smiled the moment he saw me. "She's dilated to 7 centimeters already," he said. "Doctor says it might go fast." He walked with me down the corridor toward the maternity wing, then stopped before the doors. "I wanted to say something before you come in." I looked up at him. The boy who had once called me his hero and later nothing at all. "I know everything with Marla. And the wedding. It still stings," he said. "But today I want to get it right. All of it." I nodded slowly. "Then start by calling me what I am." He blinked and for a moment looked unsure. "Your daughter's grandmother," I said. "And your mother." He smiled, more boyish than I'd seen in years. "Yes, you are. Both." Sasha was propped up in bed, a sheen of sweat on her forehead, but a calm determination in her eyes. The beeping monitors and soft whooshing of machines made the room feel like another world, one in which pain and anticipation walked hand in hand. When she saw me, her face lit up. "Lorraine," she breathed. "You're here." I walked over, took her hand. "I wouldn't be anywhere else." She squeezed it. "Gregory said you brought something for her." I nodded and reached into my tote bag. From it, I pulled a small wrapped package, a hand-knitted white cap with a pink rose on the side. I'd made it during the long winter nights, stitch by quiet stitch, whispering silent hopes into every loop. "It's beautiful," Sasha said. "I started it the night you sent me her ultrasound," I whispered, "when I still didn't know what kind of place I would hold in her life." Sasha's voice caught. "You'll be everything." The labor didn't last much longer. Within 2 hours, her cries filled the room, strong, demanding, unmistakably alive. Gregory stood frozen for a moment, staring at the tiny creature in the nurse's arms. When they swaddled her and placed her in Sasha's arms, he leaned over and kissed both their foreheads. Then he turned to me. "Would you like to hold your granddaughter?" I nodded. My throat was too thick to speak. He placed her carefully in my arms, and suddenly the world melted away. She was perfect. Downy hair, wrinkled hands like tissue paper. A little furrow in her brow that reminded me of Gregory as a baby. "She's got your eyes," I whispered. "She has your strength," Gregory said behind me. I looked up and saw that Sasha was watching us, smiling. "She needs a name," Sasha said. "We want you to help choose." My eyes widened. "Me," Gregory stepped forward. "We've got a few we like, but we want you to pick the middle name." I swallowed hard. "That's a big choice." Sasha nodded. "So is becoming her foundation." I looked down at the baby again, at the bundle of newness and endless possibilities. "Evelyn," I said softly. It was my mother's name. She was quiet, but unbreakable. "Evelyn it is," Gregory whispered. Thank you. Later, after the paperwork was signed and Evelyn was asleep in Sasha's arms, I stepped out into the hallway to give them a moment alone. I leaned against the wall, closed my eyes, and let it all wash over me. A nurse passed by and smiled. "First time, Grandma," I nodded, too full to answer. "Enjoy it," she said. "It changes everything." Back in the room, Gregory pulled out his phone. "I want to take a photo," he said. "Just you and her." I sat in the armchair, Evelyn nestled in my arms again. He snapped a few pictures, then paused. "One more," he said. "This time, holding this." He handed me the charm bracelet. Two charms dangled now, an L and a tiny baby carriage. I smiled through tears. The third charm I knew would come someday too. One shaped like a rose. As the sun dipped low outside the hospital windows, I watched my son kiss his wife. I watched a new mother fall asleep with her daughter on her chest. And I, a woman once pushed to the margins, now stood at the center of something new. Not in spite of my past, but because of it. The envelope was pale blue and handwritten, slightly crooked in a way that felt deliberate, like the person behind it wanted to seem personal, maybe even vulnerable. There was no return address, only my name, Lorraine Barrett. I almost tossed it into the kitchen junk drawer where unimportant things went to be forgotten. But something about it tugged at me. I slit the envelope open with the tip of a butter knife and pulled out a folded piece of ivory paper. The handwriting was neat, practiced. "Lorraine, I've debated writing this letter for weeks, but the images from the baby shower and the article you wrote have stayed with me. You don't owe me anything, not your time, not your forgiveness, but I owe you the truth. I didn't mean to steal your place, but I see now that's exactly what I did." My eyes narrowed as I read the next line. Gregory paid me more than money. He paid me in purpose. For a long time, I didn't feel like I mattered to anyone. So when he said he needed someone to play the part of a mother, one that looked good in photos, said the right things, smiled on cue, I said yes. "He never told me you were alive. Not until the day before the wedding." My breath caught. That meant he'd intended to replace me from the beginning, not just erase me, but fabricate a new mother entirely. I sat down at the kitchen table, the letter trembling in my hands. I asked him, "What about your real mom?" And he said she wouldn't understand. I told him he was wrong, and I should have walked away then. But I didn't. Because I liked the way it felt to belong to something. It wasn't until I saw you sitting 3 rows back in that dress, holding your hands in your lap, like you were afraid to breathe, that I realized what I had taken from you. I closed my eyes. I remembered that moment like it was stitched into my bones. The smell of perfume and cold pews. The weight of humiliation pressing into my shoulders. You didn't scream. You didn't make a scene. But I saw everything in your face. That's why I'm writing to say I'm sorry. And that's not all. There was a pause in the letter. A new paragraph indented with care. "I'm moving. Back to Oregon, where I grew up. I've spent too long performing in lives that aren't mine. But before I go, I wanted to give you something I kept. I didn't take it with malice. I didn't even realize what it was at the time. But after the wedding, Gregory left this behind in my car and I kept it. I think he meant to destroy it, but maybe part of him couldn't. It's a letter. From you. To him. Unopened." Enclosed in the envelope was a second, much older envelope. I recognized the handwriting instantly. It was mine. The letter I had written Gregory after the wedding. The one I never sent. I tore it open with shaking fingers. "Gregory, while I sat in the 3rd row today and watched you walk down the aisle with a woman I've never met. She looked poised, elegant. Your choice was clear. But I want you to know something. I was there at your first fever. I held your hand when your father walked out. I stayed up for 3 nights straight to sew your Halloween costume when we couldn't afford store-bought. I have been invisible in your life for too long, but I was never absent. I don't know what stories you've told about me. Maybe I was the burden, the embarrassment. The poor mother from the wrong side of the tracks. But I was always yours. And one day when the glitter fades and the silence grows louder, I hope you'll remember whose arms you first ran to, whose name you first called in the dark. I'll be here. Love, Mom. I clutched the letter to my chest, the years collapsing inward. It was like reading the past through a tunnel, distant, distorted, but still real. Marla had kept this, preserved it, chosen not to destroy it. Maybe that was her form of penance. Later that evening, I sat in the garden with a glass of wine and both letters in my lap. The wind was soft, the sky painted in streaks of lavender and ash. Gregory arrived unexpectedly, walking through the gate without a word. He saw the letters before he saw my face. He looked older than I remembered. Not in years, but in truth. I saw her, he said. Marla, he nodded. She told me she wrote to you. She did. He sat across from me. She also gave me something. A copy of the article. She said I should read it every year on my daughter's birthday. Will you? Yes. Silence fell. Then I held up the old letter, the one I'd written him. He froze. I never sent it, I said, but it was meant for you. He took it gently, opened it, read it. His eyes glistened, but he didn't speak. And that was enough. That night, I made a choice. I burned the letters. Not out of anger, but as release. Some truths are meant to live in the heart, not in drawers. And for the first time, my heart felt light. Not because it was untouched, but because it had survived. The email subject line was simple: a keynote invitation, Family Futures Conference 2025. I clicked it expecting it to be spam or a mass outreach, but as I read, my breath caught. Dear Ms. Barrett, your story has moved thousands across platforms, especially your essay, The Woman in the Back Row. We are honored to invite you as the closing keynote speaker for this year's Family Futures Conference in Chicago. The theme this year is reclaiming the unseen voices that were silenced. We believe your voice belongs at the center of that stage. If you accept, we would love for you to share not only your personal journey, but also how generational estrangement and silent sacrifice shape families more than anyone dares admit. Warmly, Dr. Evelyn Chen, Director, Family Futures. I read the email again and again. Part of me wanted to close my laptop and forget it. The other part, stronger now, knew this wasn't just an opportunity. It was a test. Could I take the raw, aching parts of my story and speak them out loud, not to wound, not to accuse, but to name something that so many women had endured in silence? I clicked reply, typed, "Yes, I accept," and hit send before I could hesitate. The days leading up to the conference were strangely peaceful. Gregory and Sasha came by often. Little Evelyn, barely 3 months old, had discovered her laugh, and nothing healed quite like the sound of it bubbling through the air. Sasha helped me pick a soft navy dress. Gregory offered to drive me to the airport. On the night before I flew out, he stayed behind after dinner while Sasha rocked Evelyn to sleep upstairs. I read the article again, he said. And your letter. The original one. I looked at him, waiting. You wrote, "I have been invisible in your life, but never absent." He swallowed hard. That line broke something in me. In a good way. I nodded. Because truth cracks the lies we try to live inside. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. If I could take back what I did, the wedding, the silence, the way I hurt you, I stopped him with a raised hand. You can't. But you can know it. You can carry it forward. He nodded. I want Evelyn to know the real you. Not the edited version I invented. Not the caricature I told myself to justify pushing you away. She will, I said. Because I'll tell her myself. The auditorium in Chicago was vast but warm. Rows of chairs filled with mothers, daughters, estranged siblings, silent survivors. I stood backstage, clutching my note cards, but I already knew I wouldn't use them. A technician clipped a mic to my collar. You okay? He asked. I smiled. I'm ready. When they called my name, I stepped into the light. And for the first time in my life, I didn't shrink. I began with the moment that still haunted me, sitting 3 rows back at my son's wedding, watching another woman stand in my place. I described the disbelief, the numbness, the rage I swallowed whole so I wouldn't be called dramatic. I talked about motherhood not as a job, but as a sacrifice we're never trained to explain. I shared how we pour ourselves into others until we're see-through, and then we're punished for becoming invisible. I told them how I stitched myself back together not with revenge, but with truth. And finally, I spoke directly to the women in the audience who had been quietly erased. You do not need to be welcomed in to belong. You do not need their permission to have mattered. You were there. You carried them whether they remember or not. There were tears. There were gasps. But mostly there was recognition. Afterward, a woman in her 70s approached me. She wore a modest cardigan, her lipstick slightly smudged. She took my hand in both of hers. I sat in the parking lot outside my granddaughter's graduation last year because my daughter said there weren't enough seats. Your story made me feel like I wasn't crazy for being hurt. I wrapped my arms around her. You weren't crazy, I whispered. You were excluded. And there's a difference. That night, I sat in the hotel room with the city lights glittering outside the window. My phone buzzed. A photo from Gregory. Evelyn asleep in his arms wearing the little hat I had knitted. She looks just like you when she's dreaming, the text read. I replied simply, let her dream bold. The plane ride home was calm, with just the faint hum of the engine and the soft rattle of turbulence brushing against the windows. I didn't sleep. I didn't need to. For the first time in a very long time, I wasn't carrying a suitcase full of regret. Just a tote bag, my speech notes, and the business card of a woman who had asked if I'd consider writing a book. Funny how the world cracks open once you speak aloud the truths you were taught to bury. When I landed, Gregory was waiting outside baggage claim holding a cardboard sign that said Mom in block letters. He grinned sheepishly. Figured I owed you at least one airport pickup after all those piano recitals. I laughed, and for a moment I saw the boy I raised. Not the man who'd tried to erase me, not the stranger from the wedding photos, but my son, the one who used to wrap his fingers around mine and whisper, "Don't let go." As we drove home, he talked about Evelyn, how she'd started smiling more, how she gripped Sasha's fingers so tight it brought her to tears. He told me Sasha had framed one of the photos of me holding Evelyn and placed it above the crib. She calls it the strength picture, he said. I turned my face toward the window to hide the emotion spreading across it like watercolor on paper. That night, I sat alone on my porch. The air was cool, almost crisp. Autumn was coming. The leaves on the maple tree had started turning at the edges, unsure whether to cling to green or let go into flame. In my lap was a photo album, the same one I used to keep hidden in the back of the closet. Now it lay open, pages splayed wide like a story no longer afraid to be read. Here was Gregory as a toddler covered in finger paint. Here he was at 10 missing teeth holding a second-place trophy like it was gold. Here we were on the couch asleep together after a late-night movie, my hand curled protectively over his chest. I didn't need validation anymore. The world may have forgotten those moments, but I hadn't. And that was enough. A week later, I received another letter, this time from the hospital. A certificate of appreciation for my speech at the Family Futures Conference, signed by the board and sealed with gold foil. But tucked inside was something else. A hand-drawn crayon sketch. 3 people hand in hand. A woman with curly hair. A little girl. A man. At the top, in blocky letters, my family. On the back, Gregory had written, "She drew this yesterday. Didn't even ask who was who. Just knew." I framed the drawing and placed it in the hallway where the wedding photo used to hang, because this was the picture that mattered. This was the moment that would endure. People often think closure is a grand event, a confrontation, a breakdown, a final scream. But I've found it's quieter than that. Closure is when your heart no longer races at the thought of the wound, when you walk past old ghosts and they no longer ask to be fed, when the truth once painful becomes simply true. I still garden most mornings, still read books too late into the night, still sip my coffee black and strong just like always. But now, when the doorbell rings, it's more likely to be Gregory holding Evelyn in a blanket, or Sasha bringing over a new family recipe for me to test. They don't say sorry every time. And I don't need them to. Because this chapter we're writing now, it's not about guilt. It's about presence. To anyone listening who has ever been erased, replaced, or forgotten, you are still real. You were there. And your story deserves to be told not just for justice, but for memory, for healing, for the little ones watching. If this story spoke to you, share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever been pushed to the margins of your own family? Tell me. You don't have to stay invisible. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to Grace's Truth for more stories like this. Because sometimes the quietest revenge is simply being seen and staying standing.